Hi, everyone. I'm not sure if folks can see me, if we're all set up on the tech side, but welcome to the first BIOMES talk of the school year. We're so excited to have Professor Patty Limerick with us today. We're just going to give a few more minutes for last minute folks to trickle in. And while we do that, I'm going to pass it over to Scott, who's the chair of BIOMES committee, to introduce a little bit about what we do.
Hi, everyone. I'm Scott Carpenter, third year PhD student in Bill Lauenroth's lab. I'm as Vivian said, the chair of the BIOMES committee. And for all of you new people, BIOMES stands for Bridging Issues and Optimizing Methods in Environmental Science. It's YSE's flagship seminar series hosted by the Dean's Office and facilitated by a committee of students and staff. Pre-COVID, BIOMES was held in Burke Auditorium with a lunch provided and the intention of fostering community over a meal once a week. Now that we're all online, the intention still is there to bring faculty, students, and staff together around cutting edge research and new ideas in the community to facilitate discussion and collaboration. BIOMES is a community source series, and after we finalize our theme for the spring, which we'll be doing shortly, you can expect a suggestion form to circulate around. And we'd love to hear from everybody. Since the start of this year, we're accepting new members for the BIOMES committee. And if you have any interest in joining or just curious about what we do, you can email me at scott.carpenter@yale.edu or the BIOMES email address biomes@yse.yale.edu. Following the talk, there'll be a short Q&A, and you can submit your questions at any time through the Q&A box, or at the end of the talk during the Q&A, use the raise hand function, and we'll have somebody give you speaking privileges to ask your question live. I'm going to turn it back over to Vivian now, who will introduce our introduction person for the talk. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Scott. So I'm really excited that Professor Limerick is here with us today, and introducing her will actually be one of her former advisees and current second year master's student, Chloe Dixon, who studies threats to rural Colorado water supplies, and she's actually out in Colorado right now. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Chloe.
Hey, yeah, what an honor. So Patty Limerick is faculty director of the Center of the American West and professor of history at the University of Colorado Boulder. She's a graduate of the University of California, Santa Cruz, and went on to receive her PhD in American Studies here at Yale. She's regarded for her experience and on-the-ground legwork in bridging academic divides, as well as engaging the public in humanities and applying history to understand contemporary problems, particularly in the American West. She served as the Colorado State Historian from 2016 to 2018 and was appointed to the National Endowment for the Humanities by President Obama from 2016 to 2019. Perhaps her best known work, The Legacy of Conquest, rethinks the way that Western American history has traditionally been told and stirred up quite the public and academic debate. Patty's many accolades include the MacArthur Fellowship and the Hazel Barnes Prize, which is the highest award for teaching at CU. She also advised my honors thesis when I was at the University of Colorado, so that too. Under Patty's direction, the Center of the American West aspires to appeal to our common loyalties and hopes as Westerners, and hopefully can offer something of a model for exploring contentious public issues, both present and those that are certainly to come. Thank you so much for joining us, Patty. And without further ado, I'll let you take it away.
Oh, thank you, Chloe. What an honor, really, to be back here. I did, this is not totally useful, but I have my Yale robe here in case anybody wants me to just go into the bulldog mode here. For some reason, I thought that'd be very funny if I had my Yale robe. I don't know why I thought that would be funny, because very dignified robe. So anyway, so I'm delighted to be back here. I would love to have been present, and I hope another opportunity will come for me to be there in person, because you'll hear in a few minutes, you'll hear an expression of self-reproach and anger at myself for not having gone to the School of Forestry and Environmental Studies when I was in New Haven. So oops. Well, but that could be rectified, I hope. It is really great to be giving this talk, which is called Adventures in Alliance Making, the Promise and Pleasure of Life in the Science Humanities Borderlands. And I do want to accent the word pleasure, because it is not uncommon for people to think that the tensions between the sciences and the humanities on quite a few campuses, that would not involve pleasure. And I am here to say, boy, does it ever involve pleasure. It really is, is so enjoyable on so many different counts. And sometimes the tension can actually tell you that the pleasure is soon to arrive. So here is the basic framework of my thoughts. I'm going to give you an ABT, and an ABT is an and, but, therefore statement. I have stolen this form of communication. I'm not stolen, I borrowed or adopted it from my friend Randy Olson, who has a PhD from Harvard, not Yale, alas, in marine biology and evolutionary biology. And he has given me this excellent technique for saying what you want to say in a kind of a dynamically framed assertion of a context, a contradiction to that, and then a consequence. So I'll begin with what is not quite a crafted ABT, but it's just an if-then promise. If a society chooses specialization and segregates areas of expertise from each other for decades, that actually lays the foundation for a wonderful time. This seems contradictory, but if you do have sciences and humanities segregated from each other, and then some people start crossing back and forth over that boundary, that is actually just an open door for a great time. So society chose that division, but it can be transcended. Therefore, this is a great occasion to see how much fun it is to discover each other across that division after we have been kept apart, even a little bit defined as alien others to each other, scientists and humanists. It is just spectacular these days to discover how often those alien others share our interests and hopes, and how often we would not get anywhere with our interests and hopes unless we were teamed up with the people that we were once thinking of as our alien others. So, okay, now the and, but, therefore, now you get to see the power of the Randy Olson method. And to get it right, I'm going to make sure that I get this language as it should be. So first, the agreement on how things are, the contradiction, and then the consequence. It is easy to understand why the division and sometimes even hostility between the sciences and humanities came into existence, and also easy to understand why that division got built into the structures of universities and also into the minds of academics who came to take that structure of universities as normal. But the division between science and humanities has come to present a roadblock to problem solving, and it undermines the benefits that both scientists and humanists can provide to each other and to society. Therefore, a trend of collaboration and alliance making has arisen, and that trend, which is particularly evident in the environmental studies world, now offers a very promising alternative to the divisions and polarization of our times, not just in the academic world, but far beyond the boundaries of that academic world. Now, that was an ABT. It's an approach to communication that I feel very grateful to have picked up from my friend Randy Olson. And yet my first round here betrays his spirit by having way too many words. Randy Olson, were he with us, would say, that's way too long. So I will now restate my ABT with brevity. Understandably, lots of people assume there is a serious division between science and humanities, but that assumption robs the world of hope. Therefore, let's get over that division now. So, okay, he would be happy that I did manage to get to brevity with that. So the science humanities borderland that appears in my title is the domain where I have lived for nearly 30 years. I have made multiple field tests of that refusal of the division for decades, and with a few very rare exception or two, the results of my experiment with refusing that division, that has been really positive, really good. The topics have ranged, I'll just give a list of a few of them so you can see what you might want to ask about in later discussions here. The topics have ranged from energy production, especially oil and gas and hydraulic fracturing, but also with renewables. I have worked on water management and allocation on public lands and the domain of federal agencies, wildlands fire, that one, boy, wish I had more wisdom on that one, but have some, drought, cattle grazing, digital technology and its regulation and performance in society, and nuclear waste disposal, and really, well, space policy, I mean, and more. All of those are open for discussions and Q&A, or any conversation that any of you would like to have with me after this occasion. So I'm going to give you 2 questions, audience, to ponder as you listen. And if you can get back to me today, that's fine. But these are 2 questions. One is a very broad question, and one is a much more focused one. But I would love to have your minds at work on this. The first question involves this report. This is a report put out by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in 2018. It was, it's called a consensus study report, the integration of the humanities and arts with science, engineering, and medicine in higher education. So it came out a number of years ago. Actually, I guess it was 2019 when it came out. So that was hard because it was barely out in the world trying to have an impact. And then the pandemic and the lockdowns really took that out. So this report, very prestigious, Origins, National Endowment for the Humanities participated in it as well. Very prestigious, and it does not seem to have changed the world quite yet. Again, the pandemic didn't help with the circulation of these ideas. But my first question to you to ponder is, we have a very prestigious report on dissolving the boundaries between science and humanities in higher education. And my question to you is, what would it mean to implement the goal of this report, the practices of this report, in very down-to-earth, everyday ways? If people in the sciences and people in the humanities started every day by saying, how can we perform this integration today? What would that mean? And what would it mean in your practices in your lives to be doing that? Then the question with more focus, which is pretty exciting because it's just coming out of the gate now. Next year is the 100th anniversary of the Colorado River Compact. Colorado River Compact, 1922, had an amazingly long-lasting, multidimensional impact on how we live in the West and how we manage and allocate water in the Colorado River Basin. And that, of course, ripples, so to speak, in lots of different directions. So we are just coming out of the gate, just starting to plan a series of programs for next year on 2022 and this centennial. There's a total weirdness that the American people can be oblivious to history until they get a round number. And if they have a number that is a multiple of 10 or greater, then they will think, oh, we better pay attention. So a centennial is very good. With the centennial, we have a chance to really bring deliberations, reflections, considerations of the Colorado River Compact to public attention. And of course, we also have an ongoing crisis, maybe a cataclysm and drought, and in the shrinking of the Colorado River's major reservoirs, like Meade and Lake Powell. So our timing of the centennial, we have an urgent regional and national need to discuss this compact. And for whatever reason, I may be missing something, but 2022 seems to be coming right at us without a lot in the way of planned, visible commemorations and observations. So a little group of us here are just gearing up, just in the last week or two, to take this on. We have my major partners here on campus and faculty will be a civil engineer who knows a lot about water quality, but also about dams and their operations, and a hydrogeologist. So those 2 people are my major teammates, but we will have a slew of graduate students and undergraduates. And I'm happy to say that I as a participant, bring some credibility because I have a book on the history of Denver water. I've been in the circles of water managers quite a bit. So I think we are in good standing for taking this on. And what are we going to do? That part, we know what we would like in the way of a better public understanding of the compact and its meaning for us today, but we don't quite know how we're going to get there. So think about it, audience. Think about what might come to your minds and then come into our thinking about how to make the most of this centennial. And even better, Yaleys, you were called Yaleys when I was there, we can still say that probably. Yaleys, think about joining the team. Think about how you could be part of this enterprise, because really, why not? With Zoom, we can just do it. I will say for my own work on Ditch and Time, it did get out in the world of the American West, and maybe my favorite response to anyone reading that book. I've been at lots of conferences at water managers talking about that book and other matters. And one time, a water manager from Colorado came up to me and he said, "I'm so glad you wrote that book." I said, "Well, thank you." He said, "My wife read it." I said, "Oh, that's wonderful. I'm glad she read it." And he said, "Yes, it was wonderful for both of us because my wife read your book and she came to me and she said, 'At last, I know what you do for a living.'" So that's not exactly marital counseling there, but it is me with my book on water, building a better tie between a married couple where one member of the couple was a water manager. So that is just one little suggestion of why I have a lot of hope and how we can go places with this compact centennial. So I have seen the divide between humanities and sciences, and I am not naive about the power it exerted and still exerts. I'm just going to tell one quick gloomy story just to let you know that I am not naive and I have not been protected from or insulated in the intensity of this division in society and the academic world. So several years ago, probably 20 or 30 years ago, I was giving I made a proposal. The history department at the University of Colorado was going through program review, and I had proposed that we collaborate with the sciences and engineering departments, because at program review, you get to make requests for new positions, new faculty positions. So I had a really good proposal. It was short, it got to the point. Could we, as the history department, could we build ties with at least 5 or so science and engineering departments? And could we get those departments to support our request for 5 new hires in history, the history of the field of biology, the history of civil engineering, the history of atmospheric chemistry. So, woohoo, I knew that would work. I knew people in the science departments and I knew they would support it. And I knew that the administrators would be astounded, speechless, if they saw a humanities department supported by 5 or 6 science and engineering departments. So I was very excited, really excited about my proposal. Well, the discussion didn't go well. The discussion went off the cliff with the usual humanities lament. The sciences have all the money and it's not fair, and they get all the resources and the humanities get starved. So we did that for a while. And I said, well, that's exactly why we're trying to build a bridge here and so on. Then one faculty member said, we can't collaborate with the science and engineering people. They just run over us. I thought, well, then I would be a pancake if I would be flattened if they ran over humanities people, because they've had so many chances to run over me and they've never laid a tire on me, I guess I could say. So anyway, we discussed my proposal. There were several other proposals on the table. It was a secret ballot. When we voted on the proposals, my proposal got 1 vote, which I will now reveal the secret hidden in the secret ballot. That was my vote. So boo-hoo. It's really a nice attempt. Jump forward a couple of decades, just before not too far before the pandemic, I had been invited to speak to a department members from chemistry and physics, and I was so kind of them to invite me. I was to speak on the value of writing and speaking clearly in the sciences and the humanities. And so in my talk, I said something about a grant proposal we had made where I had written in to the proposal the goal of ending the war between the humanities and the science and STEM. So I had a slide in my presentation and there was this reference to the war between STEM and the humanities. And my audience, probably 80 or 90 physicists and chemists, these physicists and chemists looked at me and they looked very bewildered. And I looked at them and I said, well, what's going on here? Well, they had not heard that there was a war between science and humanities. They had not heard that the humanities people thought that STEM took all the resources and took all the attention. Anyway, so they did not know that there was a war, and there was no indication in the room there that those chemists and physicists wanted to have a war with the humanities. They liked the humanities. So that is my realistic set of remarks here, that we have some tensions, and they are undeniable, and I am not naive about them. But we also have, I think on the part of many, many scientists, very goodwill towards reducing those tensions and building alliances and bridges. And it would be my hypothesis that, which I don't like as a hypothesis, but my hypothesis that the resistance to getting over the division between science and humanities, that may be greater in the humanities than it is in the sciences. But we can deal with that. I believe I have many counterparts in humanities programs and departments nationwide, worldwide. I just don't know as many of those people as I would like, but there is no reason to think that we have to be defeated by a kind of reluctance on the part of the humanities to go into partnership with the sciences. Alrighty, so now I want to say a little bit about how my life in the science humanities borderland could have begun much earlier, could have begun where you folks are at Yale, but did not. Here's what I did as a young person, and I say this without anything but I don't know what, just chagrin, maybe embarrassment. So I went to the American Studies program at Yale, and I got a PhD there, and I wrote a dissertation on attitudes towards Western deserts. There had been, at that time, back in the 70s, there had been many, many studies of American attitudes towards green and well-watered places. So that was kind of covered, and I thought, well, I grew up on the edge of the desert in Southern California. I would like to say something, I would like to write something about what people said and thought in the 19th century and good share of the 20th century about deserts and how they fit in an understanding of nature. So that's what I did, was I wrote a dissertation. It's published as a book called Desert Passages. And there's just a unit of discomfort in this opportunity to give this talk today, because here is a fact. There I was in New Haven for 8 years, thinking about deserts and planning to write about deserts. I never had, in those 8 years, I never had a single conversation with a hydrologist, with an arid lands ecologist, with a civil engineer, with a climate scientist, with a physical geographer. I spoke to none of those people. I made no overtures to them. I walked by their buildings. I'm sure I did that, but I never went in and said, hi, I'm from the humanities, and I would love to absorb your understanding of deserts for this project. I'm not sure how much I can learn about the science of deserts, but I wanted to visit with you. Never do it. Well, that is what I'm now going to refer to as my early era of witlessness. I almost, as I look back at that, given how my life turned out, I think, could that have been me? Did some unscrupulous trickster use the name Patty Nelson to apply to and enroll in the American Studies PhD program at Yale, and then just pretend to be me and really kind of discredit me with that insular behavior? So actually, no, I'm afraid that was me. And Yale School of Forestry, a place I never went. And then just a short time after I left Yale, within 10 or 12 years, I was immersed in the world of the Forest Service. I was speaking to the leadership of the Forest Service. I was speaking to the line officers of the Forest Service. I was a member and occasional presenter of the Society of American Foresters, which has a very fine division on the history and philosophy of forestry. I am currently, and have been for a while, a member of the board of the Museum of Forest Service History. And in 8 years of hanging around the Hall of Graduate Studies, I couldn't apparently find the time to get to know anyone at the Yale School of Forestry. Young people don't, I mean, you have to be a little bit witless because that's what we all do, but good heavens, this is looking really bad. Silos. When there we were over at the Hall of Graduate Studies, sometimes in Western history classes, talking about Gifford Pinchot, but never going near the people, never walking a few blocks to merge our conversation with the people we hadn't met in the School of Forestry. So silos. The moral to this story, though, is, I think, a good one, a happy one. Though it is really, this is just embarrassing to have told that, but now you know, so now I don't have to hide it. Okay, not that I hid it, I just tried to pretend it hadn't been as bad as I remembered. Anyway, so the moral to the story is very happy. An unpromising beginning and a late start are perfectly okay. People can change and change dramatically. Witlessness, cluelessness is not a chronic condition. It is treatable, and a person can make a full recovery from witlessness and cluelessness. I am living proof of that. The timing on some of the larger context of this science humanities conflict is kind of amusing to me. I probably should, this is a little bit self-indulgent, but it strikes me as very interesting that this famous book, C.P. Snow's famous book, The Two Cultures, the lectures that this fellow who was a chemist and a novelist at the same time, one person. He gave these lectures in 1959, and then they came out as this book, and they have been quite the touchstone for saying that there is a lamentable, regrettable division between the science and the humanities. I'm not sure that Dr. Snow really got to a solution on it, but he certainly put it out there in a very clear way. And he was very hopeful about, well, he had a vision that if the sciences and the humanities could work together, what he saw in 1959 is a terrible division between the rich and the poor, between first world nations and third world nations. He thought that the sciences and the humanities would have to work together to address that. So it's quite a hopeful statement, but it was just on the borders of fatalistic about the existence of these two cultures, the science and the humanities, and the inability to communicate of the members of those two cultures. So what is funny to me about the timing is 1959, he gives a speech. 1962, a really dreadful person, F.R. Leavis, a British literature scholar, just goes in with tooth and, oh Lord, just tooth and nail, every way he can attack C.P. Snow. This academic literature guy does that. F.R. Leavis and C.P. Snow, a famous feud. What a terrible hardening of the lines between the science and the humanities. This guy, we won't talk anymore about it because it's very distressing to me that the humanities person completely blew up any chance of the conversation with his attack on C.P. Snow. Okay, so enough about C.P. Snow, who's really interesting, really important, really worth reading. Leavis, I suppose it's worth reading what he did to attack C.P. Snow in the most ad hominem, over the top way. Well, that's all going on, 1959, 1962. Meanwhile, Banning, California, I am 1959, I am 8 years old, and the convergence in time is pretty funny because there's C.P. Snow talking about the two cultures. When he gives that talk, I'm 8 years old, and I'm not torn between the cultures. I like my science classes as a child as much as I like my reading and art classes, though I certainly can't. My drawing is probably the worst aspect of my talents, but anyway, but I could certainly appreciate other people's art. So 1959, he gives this talk. I'm in the sort of, if I wasn't reading the talk for obvious reasons, but if somebody told me about it, I would have thought, well, I don't see the division. I don't know what's going on there. Within the next year or two, I would start a downward spiral, and I would come down with my own version of the two cultures problem. I would collapse. By 1962, 1963, 12 or 13 years old, I had collapsed into a sad case of girls' science fear, and I would decide that I had better take refuge in the humanities where I could rely on words and escape math. But I would recover. Well, mostly recover because I'm still very grateful when scientists speak to me in words and do not try to communicate with me in equations and formulas. That has not really lifted as a personal weakness. But the recovery began and it continues, and it has been an extreme source of joy and satisfaction, reward, and pleasure for me. How did the recovery begin? Several lucky occasions when I was smart enough to say, I'll do that. I didn't initiate these occasions, but I did have, and this is maybe the most important part of the talk, is when you get an invitation that you did nothing to deserve, really, I certainly didn't, and you think, well, that would be scary because I would be in this difficult terrain where I would be far from an expert. That all of that is the reason why you say, yes, I'll do that. And then there may be moments where you think, why did I say yes? But you will have done the right thing by saying yes. So the first episode of saying yes that surprised me, the invitation certainly surprised me. I had been stewing for years. If anyone wanted to hear me do it, I would go through a little routine of being very unhappy that the space program, that NASA had so adopted the westward expansion frontier comparison. It just irritated me that they were always talking about space, the next frontier, and so on. I think, well, you guys, if you wanted to do that, if you want to think of space as the next frontier, you might want to have a Western American historian there. Do you think maybe? No, I guess not. So that was all I was doing, was just being kind of dismissive of how ridiculous it was for them to use that metaphor without any knowledge of what frontier or westward expansion meant. So I was chatting with some science policy people here, one physicist and a policy person, and I was at some dinner party, late 80s, just going through this little set piece of how annoying I was, how I found it, that how annoying I was and how annoying I found it, that the references to Western history never had content or meaning. Well, to my surprise, maybe a little bit to my horror, these two people at this dinner said, well, we're having a conference in a month or two on space policy. Do you want to speak there? I thought, no, I just want to say petty, carping, small-minded things at dinner parties. That's all I want to do. But they invited me, so I thought, well, okay. And in the first of many of these great opportunities, as the humanities person, as the person in the room who knew the least about the subject matter, there would be astronomers, astrophysicists, people who worked at NASA, people who worked in various federal agencies connected to NASA. And all those people in the room would know more than I would. But I would be the concluding speaker. This is how they set the thing up. I would listen to the conference for 2 or 3 days, and then I would give the concluding remarks. I could speak about the frontier lessons, but I was also to listen very hard to the conference and try to provide some concluding remarks. The topic most at issue was whether the phrase manned spaceflight was used then, human spaceflight, whether we could do it robotically or we could do it with, or we needed to have human beings. So I got to give the concluding remarks at that conference. And I remember as if it were yesterday, and it wasn't yesterday, it was more than 30 years ago, looking at a very accomplished astronomer from the University of Michigan. I think he was the head of the Galileo probe. And he and 25 others, all very knowledgeable, are sitting in the room, and I am speaking to them, and they are listening to me, Ms. Humanities, and actually engaged in a very lively conversation afterwards. That essay went into a publication called Space Policy Alternatives. I got invited to a NASA conference, all kinds of stuff came from that. So that was round one, where a sensible person might have said, oh, I don't think I could give that talk. I'm so ill-prepared. Well, that's no reason not to give the talk, as it turns out. So that was one. Another one that was a little bit less immediate in its impact, but maybe even more important, a atmospheric chemist here invited me. I have to really ask him someday why he did that, but he invited me to join an event, I guess because it was an event about mining and the long-term consequences of mining, and any good Western American historian should be ready to attend an event on that. So I went to this conference. It was largely scientists from the Environmental Protection Administration, and they were trying, or agency, and they were trying to reflect on dealing with abandoned mines and acid mine drainage all through the West, but particularly in Leadville, Colorado. Most of the people there were working there. So it was really at the coffee session before we started the conference where I thought, this isn't going well for these folks. They were very good geochemists, hydrologists. They were very good at that. And they were surprised and puzzled and kind of hurt and bewildered by why the people of Leadville didn't like them. I'm from the government. I'm here to help you. That's a problem. And yet these people had technical skills that were so valuable to the people of Leadville, and they were just in the coffee hour just not able to get on top of why that was happening to them. Why could they not be accepted as people who offered a valuable service? So there I am, a Western American historian, and I'm trying to be as gracious as I can be, but I end up having to say to them, do you know anything about the history of hostility between rural Western communities and the federal government? Is there any reason why you would have been told something about the 19th century and local mining claims? And would you have heard about that? So it was quite clear that these poor souls were being sent into rural Western communities without anything in the way of a escort that could at least appear with them and explain their context to them and to the people in the audience, to explain why these people might be different from the feds they had seen in the past. Anyway, it was very interesting. And literally my heart went out to them. I thought, that's not fair to get all this technical training to be so adept scientifically, but to be sent just like lambs into a blizzard, shorn lambs into a blizzard. That's a silly comparison, but that's what came to my mind, without some help. So that was my chance to say to myself, you cannot sit this out. You are going to get over your girl science fear, you're going to get over your witlessness, and you are going to find a way that you can help in this world, because I don't see anybody else stepping forward to help. So I've seen that my cat stepped in to help just as I said that, but that is not a helpful cat, actually. So, okay, so that led me within a few more years to do a report on abandoned mines, cleaning up abandoned mines. And I really tried to go beyond just thinking this is a misfortune to be a bystander to, and to convene a group of scientists and policy people and community people and see if we could write a report that would get this on better footing. I think it had an impact, but it was just a great adventure for me, and the chance to learn so much from people who knew things that I didn't know was spectacular. So that has happened in a number of different domains where I actually have been able to say, this is unlimited. The places where I can go and do my best to be helpful, it's astounding. And the phrase, the sky is the limit, no, the sky is not the limit. I have been, this is really astounding to me, but I've certainly been at places where climate issues and water managers are being discussed, and the sky is not a limit. We must go very high in the sky to deal with those issues. But 25 years or so ago, an astronomer here invited me to serve on a panel concluding a conference that was on the origins of the Earth, the origins of the solar system, the origins of the galaxy, and the origins of the universe. And I was on the closing panel at a big conference, and this thinking, what on earth? What on earth? Well, what in the solar system, what in the universe had brought me there. And that's where I finally really got it, that scientists are really quite gracious about wanting the humanities people, wanting the humanist in the conversation. They don't really, they're not sure what humanities people do, but they are equally unsure of what we cannot do. So they will invite me to sit on a panel where I think I held my own talking about those topics of a pretty enormous reach beyond my immediate knowledge. So that is the how I got over how I recovered from witlessness. I'm not sure I ever got over that entirely, but how I got over the kind of witlessness that kept me from being helpful and being in places where I learned a lot and other people were really gracious about including me. So I do have a lot of tales, and I'm going to probably reserve telling more of those stories for Q&A and for later conversations during the day. I have stories that I have more stories that I consider to be inspirational tales when things really worked, by having me and other humanities people, not just me, plunked into a situation with scientists. I have a few, only a couple, cautionary tales of adventures in the science humanities borderlands where things did not go so well. But I'm just going to make the big generalization that what went wrong there was more the challenges of getting scientists and engineers in different areas of specialization to work collaboratively with each other. It was less a tension between the humanities and the sciences, but more just that, or sometimes the tension between a pure scientist and an applied scientist, between any kind of scientist and engineer. That can be more of a problem than these other divisions. So I do have more stories, but I am going to hoard them, I guess, or hold them back. Stories about, oh my goodness, wonderful projects we got to do with National Science Foundation support on the subsurface and different ways that the humanities understand the subsurface and natural sciences do. So drought and community responses to drought. So I said I'm not going to tell the stories, and now I'm telling them, but I'll stop there. So if some members of the audience are now thinking, boy, she's cheerful. Does she know about the state of the nation today? Is she living, she's an historian, is she living so far in the past that she's not attuned to how divided and troubled and polarized and sometimes stalemated our world is today? I do know. I'm really aware, and I watch closely the struggles of scientists to get society to deal with climate change and with the pandemic. I watch that closely, and many, many, many other issues besides those two. And I think back when I'm thinking about these times, I have many places where I can send my mind away from the present moment to think, well, there have certainly been some very serious troubles in the past, and I have gotten to be right there in the applied history world watching that. in the mid 1990s, I went to a conference at the University of Washington where I got to the same gig. I got to give the concluding remarks at the end of the conference. It was on the atomic West. It was on the ways in which the West was often chosen as the place for nuclear weapons production and then for nuclear waste storage. I arrived at the conference. It's sort of a beginning and ending of the conference paired set of stories. I arrived there, speaking of recognitions of how grim some elements of our national heritage are. I arrived from the airport. I get in the elevator. A man in the elevator already has his name tag from getting to the conference earlier. And I look at the name tag and I actually was speechless. Colonel Franklin Matthias, not a name that most people have encountered. Colonel Franklin Matthias was the subordinate to General Leslie Groves, who did the Manhattan Project and oversaw the production of the atomic weapons. Colonel Matthias was Groves's delegated authority over the Hanford Nuclear Reservation, which is a very contaminated, really polluted with chemicals as well as radiation. Colonel Matthias was the person. I get in the elevator and I see this name tag, and that is the man who dug trenches to dump chemicals. Not particularly encased trenches, just trenches right next to the Columbia River. So I get in the elevator and I just think, that's Colonel Matthias, and I don't even know where to start. So I never took advantage. I kicked myself a little bit for that because I should have just said, Colonel Matthias, could we pray together? I mean, could we do something together? But I don't think he'd want to pray with me. I don't know. He has departed and I lost my chance. So that's how it started. I meet Colonel Matthias, except I don't really meet him in the elevator. Then 2.5 days later, 3 days later, I am preparing. It's Sunday morning. These are olden days where we were mostly relying on television for our, that's really all we have. We have radio, long time ago. So I am up really early on a Sunday morning and I am getting my remarks ready for the conclusion, my concluding remarks at this tough 2.5 days of really looking very directly at radioactive contamination of not just Western American places, but places worldwide. So I've got the TV on just so there's background noise, and it's early and there's only religious programming on. And as I'm sorting my notes, I'm trying to decide what the main things are I should say about this very, very troubling heritage from the past. And as I kind of pulling it together, pretty close to pulling it together, the TV, the people on this TV program that I haven't been paying any attention to, it's religious programming, and they say the moderator of a discussion says, he says that they're going to have a commercial break. So, and the name of the show, it turns out I had not been paying attention to it. The name of the show comes up. So this moderator says, we're going to have a commercial break. Guilt and repentance will continue in a moment. So I've had on the background in the hotel room a religious talk show called Guilt and Repentance. And so I just think, oh, for heaven's sake, the atomic West, oh Lord, guilt and repentance will continue. And we had better find better strategies for communication and collaboration in dealing with those heritages. That is the concluding point I want to make now. I want to speak about very quickly. I only have 5 minutes before the question starts, but I want to talk really quickly, a very rapid inventory of the gains and benefits that we all, humanities people and science people, get from venturing into this borderlands and even living in that borderlands. So we get test audiences to practice on in the humanities or the sciences. We fall into talking to other people who are already doing what we're doing. With this collaboration, with these alliances, we get to experiment to successfully communicate with people from another discipline. And if we succeed at that, then we have developed skills that we can use that will let us communicate effectively with the public. So, for instance, it didn't take me very long in working with biologists to find out that if I said, now biologists, let's all talk about history for a while, that maybe could work. But if I didn't bother using the word history and I said, okay, biologists, ecologists, ornithologists, whatever, botanists, we're going to talk about anthropogenic change. That is biologist code for history. And if you use that, then they're just on board and you don't have to say, we're going to another discipline. You can just say, we're staying in yours, but we're looking at anthropogenic change. Same with engineers, durability, very interested in durability and what happens to structures over time. So say that. Instead, you can say history, there's nothing prohibiting that, but you can just so quickly forge a connection with that. So we get to work as translators to practice with each other and then to move on to public audiences. This is continuing education at every level. In my case, of course, I got to go back to opportunities that I missed in childhood through this whole collaboration. So basically, it's a chance to be a freshman with courage and without embarrassment, and just to ask questions and just learn with a great urgency and appetite and no awkwardness. Third, we get to discover repeatedly that the borders and boundaries that divide up knowledge in our times are actually very permeable and very porous. We get to move back and forth over those boundaries, and that in itself is a great affirmation of hope in these troubled times, that people can still meet as strangers and even as antagonists, and then find out that they can actually work together. So that is pretty excellent as a continuing education and as a recognition that the borders and boundaries, we cross them. We can cross them. They're not even, some of them dissolve really when the permeability thing gets going. So and then a fourth one, which is quite blunt, that there's a wonderful chance to reduce the envy that humanities people feel for sciences, with the sciences have all the money. Well, the humanities can get some of that money. National Science Foundation has for years included in many of its requirements for submission of grant proposals broader impacts. Why does this matter? Why does the science matter to a wider world? And it is a funding opportunity for humanities people, big time. And then finally, the collaboration is a great opportunity to keep experimenting with humility, to be ready to take in new information and some percentage of the time change your mind. Sometimes find out that the new information confirms what you were already thinking, but other times think, oh, I'd better go back to the drawing board on these conclusions. So there's too little of that, I think, going on in society today. And so it's very excellent to be in that. Now, I do want to end with my little pitch here from my friend Randy Olson. My friend Randy Olson, who in PhD, Harvard, took a swerve, veered over in his 30s, I guess he was in his 30s, and left a tenured position and went to the University of Southern California, got a degree in filmmaking, and he has made helping scientists communicate with the public into his great cause. And he is very effective on that. He is the designer of that method of communication, organizing your thoughts. I used at the beginning, ABT, and this is his fine little book, the ABT framework. It's called the Narrative Gym, and I have extra copies of it. So if somebody's looked at the screen right there and thought, oh, I need that, well, if you send me a snail mail address, this could be yours, because I do have copies free. So that's just a little bit of a, I don't know if it's a door prize. It's not a door prize because we don't really have a door to go through here. But anyway, so Randy is remarkable in what he has done to find ways. He does a 10-hour workshop on this method of communicating, originally pitched mostly to federal employees and scientists, more and more through our collaboration, pitched to humanities people. So I don't know that I've ever in my life had a person who I considered more of a teammate in the whole project of how do we get expertise out into the world where it could make a difference. So he and I will at some point, we'll be working together in a ABT workshop, 10 hours spread over 5 weeks. If anyone is interested in that, make sure you get that interest to my attention. Center of the American West, my organization, will pay for that, so you don't have to pay anything that would count as tuition to participate in that. So that is the competition that I think is underway between Randy and me right now. I think that young humanities scholars can adopt these methods and put them to work really quickly, and they're getting a late start compared to the science people that Randy's been working with, but I think we can catch up. My wildest dream, I'm going to end with my wildest dream of what could happen between scientists and humanists. We have various very unavoidable calamities that keep occurring to us this last few weeks, good heavens. So I'm going to go back to the Gold King spill, though, of 2015, which was calamity, not on the scale of Hurricane Ida, but still a significant one, where EPA was trying to work on an abandoned mine and went poorly, and there was a major leak, and the Animas River turned the bright yellow of acid mine drainage. And there were many first responders who came out to deal with that. But none of those scientists or engineers who came out to respond to that, none of them said, we need an historian here. Did somebody forget to call the historian? I mean, we absolutely need the historian to start us off. First responder, historians as instantly mobilized squads of first responders to be there, not to take over in any way, but just to say, give me 5 minutes to put this in historical perspective and to give you some sense of how this has come up in the past, what has worked in resolving it, what has not worked, and how we can move forward. And I don't blame the scientists. The first thing we're going to say is the scientists are actually going to try to help with this. And if we're mad at them and blame them for being intruders, that is going to slow down their performance on our behalf. So that's my dream, that at some point when this coalition gets really going, environmental crisis or calamity hits, and the scientists and engineers instantly say, get the historians in here fast. So that's my last hopeful, well, it's not the last hopeful remark. I'll make many more hopeful remarks, but that is the hopeful remark with which I will conclude this talk. And now we can go to questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Patty, for this inspiring talk and so much wisdom and advice and opportunities that you're sharing with us here today. In the few minutes we have left, we can just jump right into questions. A quick reminder that if you have questions, you can type them in the Q&A box or use the raise hand function, and we'll try to get to them. First off, we have a question from Gabe, and he's asking, how do you respond to critiques within the natural physical sciences that question the methodological rigor and validity of the social sciences / humanities?
Oh, Gabriel, that's a wonderful question. Well, one of the worst ways to use we have limited time on the planet. And when I was at Yale and was closer to your age, I don't know how starkly aware I was of that, but now I'm really aware of it. So of all the things we want to do in our limited time on the planet, defending things, denying accusations and charges that actually might carry quite a bit of substance and weight, that's not a very good use of our time. So if somebody says to me, do you actually have methodology? I mean, is this, I understand it's certainly not quantitative studies you do, but do you do qualitative studies? And do you have some kind of rigor or method that you could tell us about? I'm just not needing to waste any time with that, except to say, good point, good point. I don't think I need to respond to that because it's an on target. There are good reasons to critique and question the methodological rigor and validity of my approach, because I certainly try very hard to use evidence with integrity. I certainly do that to the best of my ability. Mostly the evidence I have is patchy. And that happens in natural science and environmental decision-making in all kinds of ways, but mine is particularly patchy. So I meet with the folks, the EPA scientists working in Leadville, and I think, this is a huge issue. All of these poor scientists working for the federal government trying to be helpful. Do I know that there may be hundreds and thousands of federal scientists who are in heaven, who are beloved by the communities they try to help and so on? I don't happen to have met so many of those people. Do I think that I should hold back on trying to help the people who I know have troubles? No. So it's very delightful to be in the humanities. And I'm really pleased by the fact that we do try very hard to use the evidence carefully. We are scrupulous in applied history, never to be cherry picking and choosing the evidence that will support the policy that we might think is wiser. We always have to be very forthright about the full scope of what we've learned. But in terms of the critique, lack of rigor, when I was at Yale, there was a very nice professor, David Bryan Davis, who I learned a great deal from. He taught the history of 19th century abolitionism, and really interesting, wonderful man. Wrote great books called The Problem of Slavery in American and Western culture, I guess. So anyway, so he was really great to me. And we fought at various receptions and cocktail parties. He had once said in our class that historians should work with rigor. And I just thought, rigor, that sounds like rigor mortis. I don't want to have rigor. So I took a deep, I don't know what got into me, but I took this deep aversion to Professor Davis's use of the word rigor. And I must have, I don't know what, 17 times, not that many times, maybe 6 times at cocktail parties or something. And I'd just be going, can't you find another word than rigor? Well, to each according to their ability. So I think humanities and social sciences people should, well, social sciences maybe even more so, but humanities people should use as much as they can muster in the way of rigor. And then they should put on a kind of turn signal and say, now you are getting my best judgment. And it may be flawed, and I will probably need to correct it at some point, but that's what you're getting from me. So I'd love that question. And what a wonderful thing to say. If the shoe fits, if the critique is accurate and well aimed, thank the person who brought it to you and say, you got that one.
Awesome, thank you. I think we have time for one more question. And as a social scientist myself, I think I'm going to abuse my power a bit and go for this question from Christian, who asks, could you speak to how the social sciences fit into this relationship between the sciences and the humanities? For instance, disciplines like anthropology and geography have long worked at the boundaries of both the natural sciences and the humanities.
That's a totally great point. And some of my, many, I suppose, of my colleagues in history consider history a social science. I do have really good friends who are what we call Cleometricians, people who work with, Cleo is the goddess of history and, or the muse of history. And the Cleometricians are people who really quantify everything they can find. And they have done a tremendous amount of good. They are social scientists, and they have brought the stories of people who did not leave diaries, letters, journals. Those people are only available through the Cleometricians getting quantified information. So there's a good share of the people whose work I value very much in history who really are social scientists. Then I guess I figure that it's the poor humanities that have gone most out to sea, that have gotten on their little ice floes. Humanities people are really going to love this, but who have just said, we are doing very specialized studies of narrow topics. They are single authored. We don't really do so much in the way of collaboration. And we are going to be on our little ice floes floating out to sea. And if you are intrinsically interested in what we're doing, you should read it and pay attention to what we write. But mostly we're just not, we don't have bearing on the problems that are upon us in our time. So I'm really, and oh, humanities people, I just said all that and it's recorded, but it is true. We are not the best professional unit for saying, actually, we have something that could be useful. So I put most of my effort into saying humanities, more there than you might think. I think many social scientists have already, have not said, we are engaged in arcane studies of distant topics. They have said, you better pay attention to us. And they are much more often called out, or called in, not called out, but called into discussions of current issues. So I would say, but I also think it's very interesting that like anthropology has such a curious range of physical anthropology all the way over to cultural anthropology. And it's interesting to see that sometimes the departments have split, but maybe that's the thing, was that they already had an anthropology department would already have had some teammates who were physical anthropologists and scientists, archaeologists. What is an archaeologist, a scientist or a social scientist? So I think social scientists has been much more engaged with public issues, and maybe sometimes to its peril. I mean, things like the military's use of anthropology. Good to have escaped that from the historian's point of view. But I do realize, I really appreciate, Christian, and you both bringing that up, that I seem to have forgotten that there are 3 divisions in most conventional structures in higher education: humanities, social sciences, and natural sciences. And I think it kind of breaks my heart that for various reasons at the University of Colorado now, those 3 divisions are getting even more separated. We have a college reorganization going on where we are going to have more bounded humanities, more bounded social sciences, more bounded social sciences. And I think, not now, please, not now. So, but if the humanities and the natural scientists ever wanted to say, could we meet in the middle? A lot of the time that would be, let's go to our brothers and sisters in social science and have them bring us together.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much. Unfortunately, we're out of time, but once again, thank you so much, Patty, Chloe, and everybody else for joining us. I think we'll see some of you later on for the dinner with Patty. And of course, if you have any other questions for Patty, let us know. And I think, Patty, you would be more than happy to get in touch with anybody who does.
Can we just affirm that anyone who wants to be in touch, do stuff with me and Randy Olson, do stuff on the Colorado Water Compact, Centennial, on any of the topics that I mentioned, it's very easy. patricia.limerick@centerwest.org. So, and that could be available however you want. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I hope everyone has a great afternoon. We'll see you next Wednesday for our next BIOMES talk. Bye.